And I don't think that's the future we want to leave to our children and grandchildren. Next slide. And I'll leave you with these quotes before we go into your questions. Next slide. And I had the pleasure of sitting down with Mr. Bernie Marcus yesterday to talk to him in his home up in Boca. And that's the sentiment that he expressed to me. Next slide. We have an artificial economy. We cannot continue to monetize our own debt by printing more money. I think everyone here knows what that will lead to. And when this quantitative easing number 2 ends on the 30th of June, that means all this money that the Fed has been infusing into our economy, when that stops, there may be an economic collapse because we create an artificial economy with these low interest rates, things of that nature. Next slide. Next. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. Next slide. All right, Mr. Scott Spades, come forward. It's time to answer their questions.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here. We're going to ask the questions. We've gone through quite a few of them. We're trying to keep them into some categories. My name is Scott Spades, and I'm here with Janique Stewart. We're going to alternate asking questions. Okay. Needless to say, we got a few questions on the deficit. Why don't we start with those? The first question comes from Preston, who lives in Lighthouse Point. We'll just say the first name of the city. How many czars does Obama have, and who pays for them?
Well, I think currently we have about 30 to 35, I believe, and they are paid by the American taxpayer.
Okay, the next question comes from Ellen, who lives in Pompano. Even though Congress defunded, Obama refunded them, how can we stop him?
Well, I mean, that's one of the things. When I showed the slide up there that you have control of the House of Representatives, but you don't have the Senate, you don't have the White House. So it's going to be very difficult to get a lot of these things enacted unless you can actually have, control of the Senate and then, of course, of the White House. Or if you have a 2/3 majority in the House of Representatives, then you can override a presidential veto. So it is important, though, that we recognize one thing, that we can control the purse string through the House of Representatives, and that's how we can try to get the size and scope of this government under control.
The next question comes from Robert in Plantation. When will Congress audit or close the door on the Federal Reserve?
I think that what you're seeing, even though he made his announcement today that he was going to be running for president, Congressman Ron Paul, who sits, I believe, on the Financial Services Committee, has oversight over the Federal Reserve, and he has already said that he is going to have hearings on the Fed and start looking at auditing the Fed. And I think that's why you saw Ben Bernanke, is it today or tomorrow, he came out with this press conference.
The next question comes from Charles in Fort Lauderdale. What are you, as a member of Congress, willing to do in order to come to the middle to get things done in Washington?
Well, it's interesting when people say come to the middle. When you read and study the Constitution and the writings of the founding fathers, such as the Federalist Papers, you understand that the position that I'm taking really are right in the center. Because the thing is, if you have too big a government, that's something that they were concerned about. Then you have too little of a government, then you have anarchy. So what the most important thing is to find the right and proper mandates for the federal government and the interaction that they have with life, society, and the private sector. And so I think that if anyone does not understand it, I believe in fiscal responsibility from the federal government. I believe in our free market, free enterprise systems. I believe that if you have effective and efficient constitutional government, which are good stewards of the American taxpayer dollars, then we will have economic growth in this country.
The next question comes from James in Pompano Beach. And the question is regarding Obama's executive orders that circumvent Congress. What's your opinion about that?
Well, I think one of the concerns that I have seen up in Washington, D.C. is this. A lot of the things that we're not able to go through by legislation are starting to happen by regulation. And I'll give you a great example. A lot of people are concerned about the numeric nutrient criteria. That's one of the things that the EPA is trying to institute. When cap and trade could not go through a legislative process, now they're trying to do it through an executive order regulatory process. And that's one of the things that we have to be very, very careful about. So that's why the most important thing that we have to have in Washington, D.C., we have to reinstate the atmosphere of congressional inquiry, oversight hearings. And that's important for us to do if we're to make sure we have that balance of power in Washington, D.C.
Yes, and so now I actually have a huge stack of Medicare questions or Medicaid. So this first one is from Angel out of Broward, and her question is, please explain who and how Medicare will be affected with the budget cuts.
Sure. The thing is, what we're looking at is we have to make Medicare sustainable for the future. If you are 55 years of age or older, there is no change in Medicare for you. If you are 54 and younger, you will see a different type of system. Everyone talks about, this great, congressional health care. Well, what we're saying is we want to see all people in the United States of America be on that type of system. Now, you're also in the path of prosperity. It says that individuals, low income, will still be covered because we don't want to see people not being able to afford their health insurance. But this is the most important thing. We have to move away from the fee-for-service that we have in Medicare, which lends itself to a lot of fraud, a lot of waste, and a lot of abuse. We're talking about a defined contribution. We're talking about putting the American citizen in charge of their health care decisions. And we're talking about bringing in competition and free market solutions so that we can help the job.
in Fort Lauderdale, he asks, why aren't you in favor of health insurance companies only allowing a 20% overhead with 80% going to individual benefits?
Why am I not in favor of
health insurance companies, I guess allowing a 20% overhead with 80% going to individual benefits?
I've never been presented that issue. This is what I believe with health insurance. In this past year, we have seen health insurance premiums under the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act go up 35 to 65%. And one of the critical things we need to do is these restrictions that we have state by state so that you can't get out there and compete for a health insurance program or policy. You know, when I go out and talk to small business owners, let me tell you, they're dropping people off of health care. They're putting people on part-time because they cannot afford it. And I thought one of the things that was supposed to happen with the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act was that insurance premiums were supposed to be a lot lower, and that has not happened. So I think we need to then look at how we can open up so that insurance companies can compete for Americans. And let me say this very clearly. $500 billion of cuts to Medicare right now. Okay? One of the 159 government agencies, bureaucracies, and boards that have been implemented is something called the Independent Payment Advisory Board. It's a 15-member board. What's the purpose of that board? It's to control the spending and the cost of Medicaid. That's what the federal government's going to do. So, I mean, there's a little bit of hypocrisy that is out there right now.
Okay, we have another question from Sharon in Pompano Beach. And she says, I just heard on the radio today that you're interested in lowering Medicaid. Is that true?
Interested in lowering the cost of Medicaid to our citizens? Absolutely right. And I think that, you know, you can be the one in charge. I mean, we can't continue on, as I said up there, we can't continue on with an open-ended fee-for-service program. And you're talking about a lot of doctors. You talk to some doctors out there, they're starting to back away from taking Medicare because they're not getting the proper reimbursements. So this is the consideration we're having. And like I said, if folks are not willing to make some of these hard decisions about sustainability of this program going on, we won't have a Medicare. That's just the bottom line. Oh, and Medicaid. Now, the thing with Medicaid, also, we've talked to a lot of the governors, and the governors have said, and I talked to Governor Scott, it would be best if we block grant Medicaid so that they can take control of it for their citizens, and then have the states in charge of ridding themselves of all the fraud that is out there.
Questions here. We have Gloria out of Hillsborough. We counted on our Medicare and Social Security when we retired. How can you change the rules 16 years later? How is this happening?
Well, I have to tell you that it's not about changing the rules. It's about making sure that this program stays there. Now, I don't know how old the person that asked the question is. And as I said, if you're 55 years above, there's nothing that changes. But let me tell you what happened with Social Security. Social Security, once upon a time, was supposed to be part of an independent trust fund account. And that was changed. It was put into a general operating account, and it was raided by politicians, by wasteful spending programs. You know, when you go back and you look at Social Security, back in the 1950s, with Social Security, for every Social Security recipient, 16.5 Americans were working for that one Social Security recipient. Do you know where we are today? 3 to 1. And in about 10 to 15 years, we're talking about it going down to 2 to 1. What did I say the most important thing that we have to do in this country? Get Americans back to work so that we can replenish this program, we can get it back in the independent trust fund account, and we can make it sustainable for future years. I don't want to see anyone lose the benefits that they are rightly entitled to. But what I do want to see is that we make these programs strong again. I don't want to see us break that commitment to our seniors. They really need that. So that's where I stand with Social Security and Medicare.
From Fort Lauderdale. What is your sense regarding the Republican establishment in D.C.? Do they really understand the fiscal reality of our situation?